from the base of one cartilage to the apex of the opposite one, and therefore cross each other like the limbs of the letter X. A few fibers are continued around the lateral margin of the cartilage, and are prolonged into the aryepiglottic fold. They are sometimes described as a separate muscle, the aryepiglotticus. The arytenoideus transversus crosses transversely between the two cartilages. The thyroarytenoideus (thyroarytenoid) is a broad, thin muscle which lies parallel with and lateral to the vocal fold, and supports the wall of the ventricle and its appendix. It rises in front from the lower half of the angle of the thyroid cartilage and from the middle cricothyroid ligament. Its fibers pass backward and lateralward, to be inserted into the base and anterior surface of the arytenoid cartilage. The lower and deeper fibers of the muscle can be differentiated as a triangular band which is inserted into the vocal process of the arytenoid cartilage and into the adjacent portion of its anterior surface. It is termed the vocalis, and lies parallel with the vocal ligament to which it is adherent. A considerable number of the fibers of the thyroarytenoideus are prolonged into the aryepiglottic fold, where some of them become lost, while others are continued to the margin of the epiglottis. They have received a distinctive name, thyroepiglotticus, and are sometimes described as a separate muscle. A few fibers extend along the wall of the ventricle from the lateral wall of the arytenoid cartilage to the side of the epiglottis, and constitute the ventricularis muscle. Actions. In considering the actions of the muscles of the larynx, they may be conveniently divided into two groups, that is, 1. Those which open and close the glottis; 2. Those which regulate the degree of tension of the vocal folds. The cricoarytenoideae posteriores separate the vocal folds and consequently open the glottis by rotating the arytenoid cartilages outward around a vertical axis passing through the cricoarytenoid joints, so that their vocal processes and the vocal folds attached to them become widely separated. The cricoarytenoideae laterales close the glottis by rotating the arytenoid cartilages inward so as to approximate their vocal processes. The arytenoideus approximates the arytenoid cartilages and thus closes the opening of the glottis, especially at its back part. The cricothyroideae produce tension and elongation of the vocal folds by drawing up the arch of the cricoid cartilage and tilting back the upper border of its lamina. The distance between the vocal processes and the angle of the thyroid is thus increased, and the folds are consequently elongated. The thyroarytenoideae, consisting of two parts having different attachments and different directions, are rather complicated as regards their action. Their main use is to draw the arytenoid cartilages forward toward the thyroid, and thus shorten and relax the vocal folds. But owing to the connection of the deeper portion with the vocal fold, this part, if acting separately, is supposed to modify its elasticity and tension, while the lateral portion rotates the arytenoid cartilage inward and thus narrows the rima glottis by bringing the two vocal folds together. The manner in which the entrance of the larynx is closed during deglutination is referred to on page 1140. Mucous membrane. The mucous membrane of the larynx is continuous above with that lining the mouth and pharynx, and is prolonged through the trachea and bronchi into the lungs. It lines the posterior surface and the upper part of the anterior surface of the epiglottis, to which it is closely adherent, and forms the aryepiglottic folds which bound the entrance of the larynx. It lines the whole of the cavity of the larynx, forms, by its reduplication, the chief part of the ventricular fold, and from the ventricle is continued into the ventricular appendix. It is then reflected over the vocal ligament, where it is thin and very intimately adherent, covers the inner surface of the conus elasticus and cricoid cartilage, and is ultimately continuous with the lining membrane of the trachea. The anterior surface and the upper half of the posterior surface of the epiglottis, the upper part of the aryepiglottic folds, and the vocal folds are covered by stratified squamous epithelium. All the rest of the laryngeal mucous membrane is covered by columnar ciliated cells, but patches of stratified squamous epithelium are found in the mucous membrane above the glottis. Glands. The mucous membrane of the larynx is furnished with numerous mucus secreting glands, the orifices of which are found in nearly every part. They are very plentiful upon the epiglottis, being lodged in little pits in its substance. They are also found in large numbers along the margin of the aryepiglottic fold, in front of the arytenoid cartilages, where they are termed the arytenoid glands. They exist also in large numbers in the ventricular appendages. None are found on the free edges of the vocal folds. Vessels and nerves. The chief arteries of the larynx are the laryngeal branches, derived from the superior and inferior thyroid. The veins accompany the arteries. Those accompanying the superior laryngeal artery join the superior thyroid vein, which opens into the internal jugular vein, while those accompanying the inferior laryngeal artery join the inferior thyroid vein, which opens into the innominate vein. The lymphatic vessels consist of two sets, superior and inferior. The former accompany the superior laryngeal artery and pierce the hyothyroid membrane, to end in the glands situated near the bifurcation of the common carotid artery. Of the latter, some pass through the middle cricothyroid ligament, and open into a gland lying in front of that ligament, or in front of the upper part of the trachea, while others pass to the deep cervical glands and to the glands accompanying the inferior thyroid artery. The nerves are derived from the internal and external branches of the superior laryngeal nerve, from the recurrent nerve, and from the sympathetic. The internal laryngeal branch is almost entirely sensory, but some motor filaments are said to be carried by it to the arytenoideus. It enters the larynx by piercing the posterior part of the hyothyroid membrane above the superior laryngeal vessels, and divides into a branch which is distributed to both surfaces of the epiglottis, a second to the aryepiglottic fold, and a third, the largest, which supplies the mucous membrane over the back of the larynx and communicates with the recurrent nerve. The external laryngeal branch supplies the cricothyroideus. The recurrent nerve passes upward beneath the lower border of the constrictor pharyngeus inferior, immediately behind the cricothyroid joint. It supplies all the muscles of the larynx except the cricothyroideus and perhaps a part of the arytenoideus. The sensory branches of the laryngeal nerves form subepithelial plexuses, from which fibers pass to end between the cells covering the mucous membrane. Over the posterior surface of the epiglottis, in the aryepiglottic folds, and less regularly in some other parts, taste buds, similar to those in the tongue, are found. Section 3.